Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Importance of Asset Management. At the beginning of our Asset Management Awareness Month, we want to thank everybody from across the United States that is attending today's webinar. My name is Robert Kaler. I am the NPMA Western Region Vice President, and I am very honored to be your host and presenter today as we talk about issues that are important within the world of asset management. And today, we are talking about the importance of asset management. I promise this will be the slide with the largest number of words on it today, but I wanted to put up the synopsis of what we had planned on talking about today so that you may get a better idea of what to expect throughout our hour. What I want you to really think about, though, is that while often executives think only in terms of financial accountability and risk management, we in the NPMA and many other asset management professionals really focus on the operations side of asset management, making sure that we have the right things in the right place at the right time in order for our organization to accomplish their mission objectives. So today, as we go through the subject about the importance of asset management, we are going to start from a very high global level, the same way that macroeconomics looks at a very large environment, going down to microeconomics, which is at the individual level. We're going to do the same thing today, looking at asset management from a high executive level look, and then slowly drill down to and wind up talking about how it really affects the day-to-day jobs and what property professionals need to do in order to effect excellent asset management. So the question, why is asset management important? I like to think of things in simple terms, things that you can understand with a minimum of points, such as like an elevator pitch. And to me, asset management is really comprised of three primary elements. The first is financial accountability. It's very important within our organizations, no matter whether we're federal government, government contractors, universities, commercial enterprises, healthcare organizations. The money we spent is very important, and it's important for us to look at all the financial transactions and be able to account for them throughout the asset's life cycle. The second part is operational accountability, and that's the most important part throughout the asset life cycle, knowing what we have, where it is, who's got it, what are we doing with it, how is it being used, why is it being used, and what value are we deriving from it. And the third thing that's very important is risk mitigation. We see that throughout everything we do. How do we make sure that we are minimizing the risks to our people and our organizations through our use of the assets and across our corporate objectives? If we look at these three things, they equate to value. And this is what the primary importance of asset management is to derive the most value out of the assets that we have. As you all know, March is Asset Management Awareness Month. And I have to tip my hat to Jessica for working with the National Day Calendar to get March acknowledged as Asset Management Awareness Month. You can go to the National Day Calendar, see it out there, and it's a start of things. And the NPMA was the one that fired this up. However, there's lots of different types of interests with asset management. And I suspect a lot of these will start glomming on Asset Management Awareness Month. You see all these kinds of different interest asset types, and within each of those, we have professionals, processes, practices. In addition to that, We also have a variety of functions internally that have interest in assets, and that ranges from excess to maintenance to surplus to R&D to production manufacturing to IT, and they all have their own interests in assets. But I want to explore what it is that makes asset management a legitimate discipline to be adopted across the enterprise. And there are five things that you need to make a legitimate discipline and take it to the next level. And these, I'm going to address each one of these, but they are industry standards, executive thought leadership, academic study and published research papers. And if you've heard Dr. Doug Getz, you know that he is very big on that, as well as the next one, which is professional certifications for what we do. And then finally, technology drivers that have to change the way we're doing things. So let me address each one of these individually. From an industry standard perspective, there are a lot of standards out there that apply to asset management. Most of them, however, apply to individual segments of the asset management universe. The best example I can give you is the ASTM standards. Many of you may be familiar with these standards, but they have been designed through ASTM, the E53 Committee on Asset Management, and I think we have 27 or 28 active standards that help the constituency out there apply these practices to their own individual asset management processes. But there's a new standard that's been out for 2 years now called ISO 55000. If you're aware of that, it's an international management system standard. And that addresses the whole of an organization's asset management structure. The second piece is executive level thought leadership. What this means is that executives at the highest levels are seeing industry experts address asset management requirements. In this case, it's Deloitte. And Deloitte is one of the big four accounting firms. And I pulled this quote out. I'll let you read it for yourself. But the last sentence is critical. It says, for this reason, risk management has been widely incorporated into industry best practice for asset management, such as the ISO 55000 series of standards. So executives and organizations that are following Deloitte see this and see that ISO 55000 is a standard that is garnering attention at the highest levels. In addition, another thought leader is Tom Smith at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he has developed a number of programs within the University of Wisconsin around asset management and around adopting ISO 55000. So he's got papers out there which are being distributed to executives about requirements and deployment and adoption strategies and methodologies. Lastly, this is from SAP. And what you'll see is they're talking about asset management systems, and they're talking about their own technology doing it. But as you probably know, SAP is a very large enterprise software system that almost touches everything within an organization. The world's largest organizations use SAP. And here they're talking about going out to corporations who spend billions of dollars on assets, and they have a white paper on the mission critical role of an asset management system. So executives are being bombarded from all sides with thought leadership around strategic asset management programs within their organization, and developing solutions. The third thing is academic study and research papers. And yes, there are research papers that are done and published in scientific journals around asset management now. Many of these things have to do with more maintenance-related asset management, but it's all being lumped under the same umbrella of asset management. In this case, this is a very interesting paper that was done out of the Netherlands, the University of Twente, and that is in Enschede, the Netherlands. And the reason why I know about this is that my father was actually the dean of the business school at Twente University. And they are very, very focused on improvements in business processes, looking at how to make them run more efficiently and generate much greater value out of the dollars they're putting in. So by this university and this group within the university really looking at these research papers, we are seeing some spectacular results of demonstrating how asset management is going to benefit organizations. The fourth thing is professional certification body. Just as accountants need CPAs and other certificates, just as doctors need continuing education and getting certified and approved in their states, there's a lot of asset management groups that provide certifications. NPMA is certainly not the only one. You know, IATAM, they do IT asset management. The Institute of Asset Management, which was originally formed in England, is now in the United States, has a very rigorous program for certifying its professionals. The maintenance and reliability professionals who consider themselves asset managers, the Fleet Management Association, NAFA, the surplus assets people, as well as the facilities. So we're seeing certifications across asset management, which just validates it as a profession. And finally, we have technology drivers. In this case, the technology that's really driving the adoption has to do with something called the Internet of Things. If you are familiar with that, lots and lots of things you have today are now connected to the internet. Everything from your phone to your car to PCs. You can have your lights connected. You may have, you know, upgraded within your home security system, refrigerators, production equipment, and on and on and on. In fact, it's estimated that there are going to be 75 billion devices by 2020. But what they're doing is giving you the ability to capture information about that asset, real-time information about that asset. It's going to generate tremendous amounts of data. And already there's a lot of use of internet or IoT devices within businesses. Ernst & Young, another large accounting firm, did a survey of their clients, and they found that a quarter of them are already using digital sensors or other sorts of data collection devices in their locations. And they're also 25%, quarter of them are embedding digital sensors in their products to be able to get the data back out. And then finally, in their production and distribution operations, which many people consider asset management, nearly half of that process is automated with automated collection of data information from those assets. So these technology drivers are going to be a very important part of improving asset management, because management is going to look at all of this data that's coming in and saying, what are we going to do with it? So big data is on its way. that's a subject for another discussion, but be aware that these 5 elements, which really come down to standards, thought leadership, academic study, professional certification bodies, these technology drivers are all leading the way for new asset management and really elevating the importance of it throughout organizations. So I want to look at a probable asset management scenario that we're all going to be looking at in the very near future. But in the meantime, I think we want to run a couple of quick poll questions, Jessica, about these scenarios. And then once we answer those poll questions, then we will continue with the presentation. Jessica, I can't see the poll questions on my instance.
Yeah, the first poll has been launched, Bob. So we have,
okay.
Are you aware of ISO 55000 on the screen now? We're up to 74%, just another couple seconds for everyone. Okay, everyone, we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, Bob, can you see the results?
I cannot see the results.
All right, I will read them. So of everyone who responded to the poll question, are you aware of ISO 55000? 43% of you said no, 49% said a little, 7% said a lot, and 1% of you is an expert. So that is the results of this poll question.
Well, let's get that 1% a connection in here so they can answer some of these questions.
Would you like me to launch the second question?
Yes, please.
Okay. Second question coming up. We'll just take a second here for everyone to respond to the question. Is your organization considering adopting ISO 55000? All right, we'll be closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so from the question, is your organization considering adopting ISO 55000? 25% of you said no, 5% of you are thinking about it, 6% of you have already started, and 64% of you are not sure. All right, Bob, I'm turning it back over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Those are very interesting. Surveys that come back. I like the fact that some have already started and are looking at it, because the answer to the probable scenario is that I believe your organization will adopt and implement ISO 55000. And so I want to address, what does that mean to you? Some of you that have smaller organizations will take the principles and probably not adopt. But if you work for a larger organization, you will. Why do I say that? Because I know that there's active effort in most of the industries that NPMA really focuses on. The federal government is looking closely at ISO 55000 as it can be applied to the federal government. The Asset Leadership Network has had 2 conferences in each of the last 2 years that have drawn multiple hundreds of people from government agencies specifically to talk about ISO 55000 and how it can be deployed across the federal government. I know several large government contractors are currently looking at ISO 55000 with an eye on starting to deploy. I know that some universities have active initiatives to study and look at ISO 55000, And then, of course, commercial organizations tend to be the fastest to deploy these things because they look at these standards such as ISO 9000 as a way of giving themselves competitive advantage. So my thought is that your organization will adopt and implement ISO 55000. So let's get ready and let's look at the importance of asset management, how it can benefit you, and we're going to look at you from an organization side. So ISO 55000 is different, as I mentioned, because it's a management system standard. What does that mean? If you look at the graphic, you notice that the big circle is just how we manage our organization. A circle inside of that is how do we manage our assets? And that's a program and a plan and a strategy. Your asset management system is really the framework of the processes and procedures that you use to make sure that you can fulfill all the tasks that are required to achieve the objectives in the asset management plan. So in simple terms, they refer to this as plan, do, check, and act. And ISO 55000 really looks at that. So why is ISO 55000 different from other standards? I took this and adapted it from Tom Smith's University of Wisconsin white papers that he's done, and some of the work that he's done. And he's telling executives that it moves asset management from a performance focus. You know, we need to do this, we need to move this, we need to repair this, we need to tag this, we need to inventory this, to really a value focus. Why do I have this? How is it being used? Where is it being used? And who's it helping? So this requires a different view of the assets across their life cycle. And it also looks at economic and social drivers for asset management and makes organizations draw those in. And it, as a result, then encourages new safety, security, environmental actions around these assets for continual improvement. So this is really different than a lot of other standards that say this is the way you need to do something. This, the ISO 55000 standard, really is focused on why and how we do something and the reasons behind it and managing it through the entire asset life cycle so that you maximize the value of each of the assets in your organization. So when we do this, if we adopt a single system to oversee asset management across the entire enterprise, there are going to be a lot of connecting functions, a lot of different groups in the organization that are practicing asset management in their view of things, but there may be some conflicts in what you think is asset management, what they think is asset management, and you have to work out those processes as you deploy your new standard. So you can look through and you see all these different functions within your organization that all have an impact on asset management. Now, there was a precursor to ISO 55000 called PAS 55. It's very interesting for you to look up. It's a public availability standard, and it was put in place in the UK so that contractors that were managing infrastructure projects, rail systems, bus systems, transportation, public buildings, etc., in the UK needed to manage the assets so as not to deplete it, but to keep the value of that maximized throughout the entire life cycle. So you see the plan, do, check, act cycle on the screen, and you see the different parts that come up. So the policy, then you got strategy, objectives, and plans, the controls and enablers, then the asset management plan. That's where the life cycle activities come into place and the tools that you have. That's most of what we think of as asset management from a perspective of functional doing it as opposed to an overall strategy. And then finally, we're in the check, which is performance assessment and improvement. And many of you that are working, for a federal contractor, for university, and even in the federal government, understand the self-assessment process. And this is really what that addresses. Looking at what we're doing, finding areas in which we can improve that, and then reviewing that, changing the policy, put those improvements in place, so there's a constant cycle of continuous improvement. So let me give you an example from Australia about what really makes up a big asset management plan and why they think it's so important. There is, if you look at that, we've got, addressing within the graphic box of what the levels within an organization are. And GFMAM is the Global Forum for Maintenance and Asset Management. Australia, just as a background, has been very aggressive in adopting ISO 55000 standards. In fact, they have legislation that requires all public entities, so government entities, to have ISO 55000 in place for their asset management. So the Global Forum put together subjects addressing that. Now, below in the asset management system, I just want to highlight, that should say ISO 55001. 55,000 itself is more of an overview and a substance document. 55,000 is actually starting to put it into practice. But the 39 subjects look like this. These are the individual areas that you must address in your plan. And you see it's very similar to what we looked at before. And I'm not going to read all these to you, but definitely you got strategy, decision making, enablers, and then the life cycle delivery activities, and then the risk and review portion. So these subjects in total make up a complete asset management system, at least according to the Global Forum for Maintenance and Asset Management. Now, the Institute of Asset Management has a conceptual model that's similar. Again, an international body, UK-based, also here in the US with a number of chapters and aggressively working with large organizations to help them deploy ISO 55000. And you see the same thing. You've got the organization enablers, you got strategy and planning, decision making, your life cycle delivery, your risk and review. And all of that is driven from an organizational strategic plan. So we look at the IAM subjects that are underneath theirs. You'll notice that those subjects also total 39, and they're very similar to what the Global Forum put out. And these slides will be available for you if you want to spend more time looking more deeply at these charts. So let's look at a real-life case example. We are looking at an asset management journey. I've got a couple slides from PG&E. If you're not familiar with PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric is obviously the gas and electric company centered in Northern California, serving millions and millions of consumers. And they are adopting ISO 55000 now. Why? Well, theirs is really a risk mitigation program. They had an asset management failure. They failed to have the right equipment in the right place. They failed to keep it maintained correctly. They failed to keep it within tolerance of what they're putting through the lines. And if you might remember, they had a serious incident where one of their lines ruptured and essentially blew up an entire neighborhood right by the San Francisco airport. Many people were killed. The entire neighborhood was destroyed. and they have serious risk. They have serious problems, but they took a very aggressive approach at their asset management. And if you look at it, they started in 2012. They are through, and this is a little timeline of what they did. They used Lloyd's of London to do their assessments and their visits and their assessments, and you can look at that as they went through. But here in the next slide is sort of their progress in their areas of asset management focus. If you look on the left, you see where they were in October 2012 when they first started their asset management program. Like many organizations, their asset management was a mess. They only had a few areas where they actually were doing well, although they could scope for improvement. There's a number of places with minor non-conformance, but if you look at the majority has major non-conformance with asset management best practices. So they took an aggressive approach and went after it. PG&E is the first U.S.-based company to get certified as ISO 55000 compliant. And you can see that they turned almost every single one of their asset areas and disciplines into green. So they have developed their progress. They're doing very well. And there are some number of case studies out there that I'd be happy to share with you as to how PG&E has really turned around and are delivering a lot more value back to the stakeholders and the subscribers for their services, and their asset management is far more controlled, far more comprehensive, and they have far more confidence in the health of their entire overall system. So asset management really is affecting a lot of the organization. So we don't want to look at who. When we've decided what we are going to do when we put an asset management system in place, it's not looking at the who, it's looking at the what, the why, and the how. And you'll see that between three different entities that we look at through the asset management lifecycle. From the owner's got a bunch of different responsibilities and things that they focus on. And that has to do with the business values and the strategy and targets and their corporate objectives. The asset manager now is looking at it from a high level. So they're looking at operations planning, maintenance planning, they're looking at their life cycle costing, they really focus on the risk management and the budgeting. And then the last part is actually the people that are providing the service to the assets. The asset people out there, the people that move it, the people that maintain it, the people that bring it in, the people that use it. And that looks at really the life cycle aspect from procuring it or constructing it to doing condition monitoring, to put it in place, to maintaining it, and then collecting the data and keeping it going. And then once you report that data, it goes back to the business value section, and the owner picks it up, takes that data, looks for a way to do some continuous improvement on it. So what does this mean for property management? So we've looked at a high level, asset management is important because it's being driven by executive level thought leadership, returning value back to the organization, and then within the organization, looking at what does the plan look like, what do we need to do within our organization to bring it, how are we going to bring it across the entire organization, deal with all the different aspects of asset management that we have through here. And now I want to look at, but what does this mean for property management? By property management, if you're not a longtime member of the NPMA, what we mean by property management is physical assets that typically can be moved, that come from of the U.S. government. So it's items that are considered personal property. And when talking about property management, we're specifically talking about that as opposed to all assets such as real property, intellectual property, other types of things that are outside the normal scope of personal property, things that can be moved, and elements that are part of day-to-day operations. So where is property management going to fit into all of this and provide value? And I'm going to start by saying I made a word cloud. If you're familiar with a word cloud, what I did is I went to the NPMA website, sent this little program that I found online out there, and it collects all the different data that is out there for on our website, and it comes back with a bunch of terms. And you see a lot of the terms that we bring up from the original global view, and the 5 things that I talked about are needed for a change. And I think that NPMA meets all of that. So if you look at this, definitely referencing the standards. We have thought leadership. We've got our asset management journal. There's some good stuff coming up in academic studies. Obviously, we give certification. You can see that all over this site. And then there are, again, technology drivers. You see the term for RFID and all of that. So with this word cloud, it really defines who we are as an organization and what does it mean for us and the role that we can play in an organizational entity. So this is a word cloud. And now, a word from our sponsor. I want to thank NPMA for hosting this, but for you members, I want to say that our sponsor, we have a jewel of spring fashion. We have put out, as a celebration of Asset Management Awareness Month, a t-shirt that's available online to benefit the NPMA Foundation. It's got the word cloud on the back, the Asset Management Awareness for 2017 on the front, and then we're encouraging all members to go out and acquire one of these t-shirts. The proceeds benefit and go directly. Everything goes directly to the NPMA Foundation. And I think, if I still know how to do this, here is the web page on Booster. If you look up here, you can go there, and this gives you the opportunity to get your shirt. You can buy one, but you can also donate directly. If you don't want to buy a shirt, you can make a donation to the NPMA Foundation. Everything goes to the NPMA Foundation in order to provide more scholarships and grants for students to go to more learning opportunities, generate more knowledge to be able to share with their organization. So I encourage everybody to go out there. It's www.booster.com/NPMA 2017 AM, which is Asset Management Awareness Month. And so go out there and do it. So after that plug, I hope everybody's got a t-shirt. I already ordered mine. They're going to be great. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. So looking at our word cloud, looking at what ISO 55000 means, looking at what an organization has to do to appropriately adopt ISO 55000, property management, and those of us that have been in this NPMA industry for a while, we have a tremendous head start. Again, if you look at the graphic I put there, we talked about the global forum requirements in their subject area. There's subject area that we had in the early part that talked about the asset management program. And here we can substitute almost directly the FAR ASTM standards as part of that asset management, and then the contractor's plans and systems almost feeds directly into the asset management system. And the federal government, if you look at FAR 52, it really talks about a system that looks very, very much like an ISO 55000 system. So we already have a system. We've already put plans in place. We adopt standards. We've got the ASTM standards, and many organizations have addressed these standards in their property plans and procedures. We perform all the life cycle activities. We report our statuses regularly. We do have a review process, self-assessment, etc., and not to mention audits sometimes. And then we implement improvements. So property management is already familiar with what ISO 55000 is looking at. This is going to be a lot more difficult for a lot of the different types of asset managers that don't have the prescriptive plans, that don't have the prescriptive processes that are required to meet the stringent requirements put upon people managing property that belongs to others. So we are in good shape. We already work with a lot of different parts of the organization. You see a list of these different organizations that property managers are working with. One of the things that's really key to ISO 55000 and making it work effectively is collaboration and communication between different organizations that you wouldn't think have much in common, but they have one thing in common, and that's the asset. They all have an interest in an asset at a different time and for different reasons. We also have this specialization with industries with unique requirements. The federal government and their management has some very unique requirements, which we've put into place and are drawing. Same thing with contractors, same thing with colleges and universities, especially research institutions. Same thing with fleet. And looking at the NPMA and some of the fleet certifications that they're doing, we're developing that. Our healthcare SIG is doing fantastic things and really developing great knowledge base for NPMA members that have a specialization. So when we look at our specialization in certain areas, understanding that other areas have different requirements, but all working with a variety of people in an organization gives us the capabilities to really do well with asset management. And furthermore, if we look at the life cycle aspect, and if we go back to some of those life cycle activities in the other organizations' views as to how things have to be as a part of the asset management overall program, we already have these 10 subjects in FAR that map very closely to what has to be done within the life cycle. So our members already have a lot of the knowledge that they need to be effective in this. So how do we leverage that? Well, first of all, I want to take a look at what kind of challenges I think are out there for property management. Number one is that we all know that property management sometimes doesn't get the level of respect that it really deserves. But we need to make sure that we have a seat at the table. When an organization sits down and decides that they're going to deploy an asset management system that meets ISO 55000 requirements, we need to be a part of that from an NPMA, from a property management perspective. The second thing that's going to be hard is keeping up with the volume and velocity of data that's going to be coming in. This is going to be a serious challenge for your systems. It's also going to be a serious challenge for individuals whose responsibility it is to sift through that data and make decisions based on that data. We talked about the Internet of Things. That can send a tremendous amount of data into your system and telling you about itself. Computers can tell you about it, plugged in production equipment, what's going on. The amount is going to be tremendous. And they're talking about big data. Harvard Business Review did a very interesting article on big data and assets and how much it's going to generate and what an organization needs to do to capture that data and use it effectively. So that is going to be the challenge of getting your arms around that. Perhaps the biggest challenge is going to be integration of our best practices across the various disciplines that you've got in your organization that make up the whole of asset management. And I want to say we don't want it the other way around. We have developed some best practices and are literally required in some instances to follow certain practices. When you divide these practices and develop them for deployment across your entire enterprise, people tend to look at things and try to simplify it and not have special carve-outs for a lot of things. It's going to be vitally important that we do have that seat on the table and that we protect our own interests and especially the requirements that we have in managing property according to the policies and procedures we have in place right now. So with those challenges in mind, I want to say we actually can do some fantastic things and add a lot of value to the asset management process, especially in some areas that are really very important parts of the process. So these 6 things that we do, I did a seminar series over the past year or so that was all about looking at asset managers, and I called it utilizing your most important asset. And I believe the most important asset is a person that understands how to manage everything that they've got going, an asset being a person. And in that, I explored these 6 things that we can do really well, that we can really bring value to the organization in total because of our expertise in these things. I've shortened them down a little bit, but in each of these things, we have significant education opportunities. We've got standards that apply to it, and they're time tested. And how are they time tested? Because our employers, our organizations have been audited by outside organizations and proven to be adequate with it, or we wouldn't be doing it anymore, or we wouldn't have the job. So let's explore these 6 things that we may be able to do and bring to your organization to add significant value and make asset management really from an important side. The first thing is physical inventory. Now, actually going out and shooting or writing down barcode tags or inventory, that's not what we really bring to the table. It's the process of setting up an inventory, determining how we're going to do it, determining what we're going to look at, determining samples, and then analyzing the data, looking at what it's telling us, maybe needing to do more, and then reporting on it. There are virtually no other areas within asset management that do physical inventory the way property managers do it, and to the level of in depth that property managers do it. Most times organizations hire an outside third-party company to say, come in, tell us what you found, give us a report. They get a report. They never really see any improvement on that, or if they do, It's lip service, it's looked at, and then they forget about it until they do another inventory 2 or 3 years out. With ourselves, physical inventory is something that is done and has to be done right. We know how to do it. We can bring that value to the organization. The second thing we do really well is keep track of sensitive items. Most of our members belong to government contractors or federal government or big research institution that's dealing with government money and are used to having to deal with sensitive information, sensitive items, whether it's export controlled or ITAR regulation. So because sensitive items are growing all the time, because we have standards that deal with high-risk equipment, we are very well positioned to really help our organizations mitigate the risk of mismanagement of sensitive items. Third thing that we do really well is managing assets tied to agreements. And more assets that we have now, they don't have to be a contract asset, just anything we buy has some sort of agreement. Could be on a warranty, could be a lease, or could be a maintenance agreement, could be just a property pass. But being able to manage those things against agreements is something that very few other disciplines within the asset management world do. One of the things that we do best is tracking transfer and movement. This is something that the auditors are very concerned with at all of our customer sites. And so we have to do it really well. We have to keep track. And it's really important that we don't lose visibility or custodial responsibility. Kind of comes back to those two things, financial accountability and operational accountability. This is something that asset managers do very well from a property perspective. Probably the hallmark of a property manager is keeping complete records. We have to keep history. A lot of other asset functions don't keep the history. Once they change the data's changed and all they care about is the current data. Well, that does not actually provide you with the kind of information and the metrics you need to manage well. You need to look at the changes that are made throughout an asset's life cycle. What happens to an asset? What may have caused? What incident was it a part of? And building that history is what gives you all of the raw data to be able to analyze, perform analytics on your data, and start using that to figure out how you can maximize the value on assets. Some of that could be replacement. You know, when to fix or buy new, when to flip something, when to look at replacing items. So having the complete records and history are critical for that feedback loop that is a core concept of ISO 55000. And last but not least, something that we do really well, and that's excess and disposal. Quite often, asset managers, they're looking at just getting rid of stuff. They just toss it out there. They don't have significant processes in place for managing the excess and then the disposal process and then contract closeout or asset closeout. So it's a very complex process that NPMA members are very good at. And we've got quite a number of standards that help us with that. A lot of education. If you go to an NES, which is coming up in Phoenix at the end of July, I hope everybody goes there. It's going to be beautiful. But when we look at that education, a lot of courses on how to manage excess, how to manage the disposal process so that you maintain that financial accountability and that accountability on an operational side. So the 6 things we do really well that you'll be able to get your seat at the table, and that the important part of asset management, especially the way we do, are really solid in your asset management plan. So the physical inventory, the sensitive items, the agreements, the transfers, the movement, the records and history, and of course, excess and disposal. So my call to action for you is to reach out to your organization, share your expertise, and show the value that you can bring. Because value-based outcomes, and outcomes is something that has been talked about with us a lot and is now getting a lot of traction in the general asset management world, is that we're going to do this by collaboration, information, promulgating information, influencing others, sharing information. We're going to do that with lots of different community of practice in our organization. Through analysis, we're going to put best practices in place. We're going to use standards, and then also sharing through seminars and conferences. So, why is property management important to your overall asset management initiative? Comes back to these things. Property management is focused on, and has been focusing on, the 3 pillars of really benefit of asset management, and that is financial accountability, operational accountability, and risk mitigation. And by doing that well is how we add the value, and why asset management is so important. So in summary, as we close out, we're an executive level initiative now. Large thought leaders, knowledgeable thought leaders are talking about this. Academic institutions are researching it and publishing papers. There is the international asset management system that is being driven from high levels down so that we manage our public assets with a lot of diligence and creating a lot more value for the taxpayers. Commercial organizations are doing it for competitive advantage. So the thought leadership is really giving a lot of traction to this. But you, NPMA certified property managers, educated property managers, you have the experience working with plans and standards and processes, and you measure outcomes. And these are all things that are required under ISO 55000. So you can immediately provide value to the asset management initiative within your organization. So with that, I will take any questions or comments people have.
Okay, I do have a question typed in for you, Bob, and if any others have questions, feel free to type those in now or press the raise hand icon. So the first question is, since we have already written and embraced company policies that follow ASTM standards, why bother adding ISO 55000 as an additional standard to follow? So what is the benefit of that? And since ASTM is a worldwide recognized standard for industry best practice.
That's a very
that was a mouthful.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and I'll try to answer it in a succinct manner, because it's something we could talk, quite extensively about. But the ISO 55000 is a different kind of standard than an ASTM standard. An ASTM standard really is focused on a particular activity. There's a equipment control matrix standard. There is a standard for movement. There is a standard for disposition. There's a standard for tracking low-value property, and so on and so forth. And those deal directly with those little standards and individual items. ISO 55000 is it's a management system standard. It doesn't tell you how to do anything. It doesn't have any standards that says the best way to conduct an inventory is X. What it is a management system standard, and I wish I had a lot more time to go into it, but it starts by establishing you will have an executive level of leadership. You will develop your plans and processes in total to achieve corporate objectives. And your objectives are going to come down and being driven by your corporate needs, requirements, and mission. Then within this ISO 55000 standard, you put this program in place, you can go out and select different standards, such as your ASTM standards, for individual activities that you need to do. And there are a lot of other standards also that can be used for those activities, but they are for activities and not for a big management system. That is a significant difference between the two. So you are not really replacing or adding another standard to a bunch of existing standards. It's more like an umbrella standard that'll go over the top of everything, and it's an enterprise-wide initiative with executive look and driven by the organization's mission and objectives and strategic plan. I hope that answered your question. If not, we can have a longer discussion offline.
Thank you, Bob. And for the good of the group, we did have one question come in regarding which organizations in the U.S. have implemented ISO 55000 already. And I do understand that PG&E has received their ISO 55000 certification within the U.S., which is great. And I know that others are in progress. Do you happen to know which other companies are in the process of receiving their certification or working towards that certification?
Yeah, I got a list of those that came in email this morning, and I didn't get a chance to look at it. That came from a different group I was looking at. But I can tell you two organizations right now that are pretty well along the way. One is here in the San Francisco area where I am. It's the Bay Area Rapid Transit, the BART system. That's our rapid transit system. It's kind of like the metro if you live in DC. They are going after ISO 55000. They're a couple years into their process, and also New York City Transit is going after it. So I know those two have been very aggressive and looking at it. Plus some pharmaceuticals. Genentech has an initiative going on for asset management. Certainly they deal with a lot of scientific equipment, a lot of regulation from Food and Drug Administration and things like that. So they have adopted this standard because they really need to, in addition to just the financial and operational accountability, they are really looking at risk mitigation. And as we saw in the Deloitte quote up front, risk mitigation is a huge driving factor around asset management programs for large organizations.
Thank you, Bob. And I have another question in the queue here. Is ISO 55000 being used in conjunction with ISO 9001, or is it replacing ISO 9001?
No, they're really different standards. There are some places where perhaps there's some commonality, but the ISO 9000, 9001, 9002 is a quality assurance standard, and it's following to have significant quality and manufacturing processes that meet requirements that are set out by the organization. The ISO 55000, 55001, 55002 are all about asset management, not quality control. So there are some overlapping areas perhaps, but they do different things fundamentally. One word about the 9000, 9001, 9002. The 9000 or the 0 or the 55000 is kind of an overview and a kind of a statement to management that talks about what they're going to do and talks about planning and overall objectives. The 55,001 or 9,001 are put into place and some specific types of things it wants to look at, those subject areas, for instance, and addressing each one of those different subject areas. And there are a number they're actually within the 55,001 document, and then the O2 document, the 9,002, 55,002, 55,002. Those are some documents for practical applications, how people did it, helping to put it in place, case studies, things like that. It just helps it. So those three documents are all for the same thing in the large sense, but they address three different little areas within the overall process.
Thank you, Bob. Briar, Terry, do you have a question? That may have been an accidental hand raise. I'm going to go ahead and mute back. So I believe that answers all of the questions that we currently have in the queue, Bob. So thank you again for this fantastic presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time to share this with all of us today. And to everyone on the phone, I'd like to say thank you for participating, and I hope that you were able to get a lot out of this presentation today. We have lots of webinars scheduled for this month, and I hope you'll be able to participate in as many of them as possible, and we'll also be sharing the recordings on YouTube. Additionally, a couple of you will win an Amazon gift card for your participation, so fingers crossed that your name gets drawn. I'll probably let you know tomorrow if you're one of our winners. So good luck to everyone, and don't forget to buy an Asset Management Awareness Month t-shirt to support the NPMA Foundation.
Thank you, Jessica, for hosting this. You've done a great job in arranging Asset Management Awareness Month. There wouldn't be a National Asset Management Awareness Month without you. So you will go down in infamy, and in 20 years you'll be able to say, hey, I started that. And that we as NPMA members can say, hey, our organization started that, by Jessica. So thank you all for attending. If you've got any questions, feel free to email me. My email's up there. You can get a hold of Jessica, and she has the slides if anybody wants a copy of the slides. And as always, I always enjoy the time I spend on webinars with people. I hope you found it valuable, and I just want to say that I believe asset management is critically important, and that it's going to be really a growth area, and it's something that we're all going to be able to benefit from, and we should seize the opportunity because it's right there in front of us. Thank you.